I was able to recently watch the Arnold Schwarzenegger Netflix documentary, and it was very interesting to really see Arnold describe his life and tell his stories. And basically, it was a biography, which was very fascinating. I'm going to be taking a look at Arnold's chart today. We did find a birth time, so this should be kind of interesting. We're going to compare the birth chart to some of the stories that he told in the documentary. So this should be quite entertaining. For those of you that are new to my channel, make sure you like and subscribe. I practice Vedic astrology, not Western tropical astrology. So make sure you go to the appropriate calculators. For the month of June, I'm running a special 40% off if you use code name Thor at checkout. If you're interested in a reading, check for details down below and you can arrange one. So let's go ahead and take a look at Arnold's chart. This should be quite fascinating here. And I'm going to be pulling that up here on Paint. I also want to give the quick disclaimer that this is for entertainment purposes only, and I'm merely just speculating as to the astrological energies in Arnold's Vedic astrology chart. So, Arnold is a Gemini ascendant, and I forgot to grab my stylus. All right. So, he's a Gemini ascendant right here. And you notice that Mercury is in the first house, it's his ruling planet. And, this makes somebody very identified with the body. So, this idea that he became a bodybuilder. So, he was, I believe, Mr. Universe and then Mr. Olympia, like these very important titles in bodybuilding. Well, Mercury is the first lord, it's in its own house of Gemini. So, this shows the first lord in the first house. I'm very identified with how I look, my body. Okay. So, for example, if your first lord was in the 10th house, you would be very identified with your career. If it was in the seventh house, you'd be very identified with your spouse. You might consider your terms you might consider yourself in terms of your marriage. So this is where I feel like the whole bodybuilding uh, scenario really developed through Mercury being very powerful. Mercury in the first house also makes Arnold quite intelligent. So I find it amazing that, he was born in Austria and then he was able to move to America and basically not know the language. He picked up the language and he basically became a Hollywood star at some point. So that's quite amazing. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was he talked about his upbringing in Austria. And he did talk about he had some difficulties with his father. His father had been through a war and there were some difficulties there. When we look at family of origin and the experience that people have in their upbringings, we typically look at the second house. And so if you're interested in looking at it within your own chart, always look at the second house and also look at the fourth house. This gives you a bit of an indication of your upbringing experience, how you experienced it, since the chart is really showing how you're perceiving things. So it doesn't necessarily show how people on the outside are perceiving it. So whenever you have Saturn in the second house here, it shows difficulty. It shows a lot of judgment, a lot of criticism. Likely Arnold's father criticized him quite a bit. I know there was a lot of perfectionism. For example, I guess his mother was like really obsessed with like making everything perfect with the cleaning of the house and so forth. So this shows that rules are very important. So Saturn can also, besides the rules being very important, it can create this atmosphere of obedience, of strictness, and so it can kind of flavor the upbringing. Usually, it's not seen in so happy of terms with people that have Saturn in the second house. And believe it or not, even though we think even though we feel that Arnold, most of us do at least, Arnold has a little bit of an ego. Some people might even consider him like very boastful. This actually shows that he has problems with well, at least he had problems with self-esteem. So this was an important issue he had to overcome in his lifetime. It wasn't something that he just immediately had this high sense of self-worth. Okay, this was a challenge. And also, speech, even though he's very intelligent, it was a challenge. Really learning a new language was very challenging to him. The issues with the father are going to be right here with Sun. So, Sun and Saturn together, remember, these are dire enemies right here. So, Saturn is essentially suppressing the Sun. It's really harming the relationship with the father there. Also, when Saturn's oppressing your Sun, it can show issues with ego validation. So there could have been a lot of criticism, and he really had to go out into the world and explore things to find himself and so forth. Also, Sun in the second house is going to show usually the father was the central figure of the family. So that's also something to consider as well. Saturn is with Venus, by the way. So this could show some issues, a lot of karma surrounding love and romance. And we learn that later, especially, with his marriage. Even though we're going to talk about that in a moment, I do feel like he really loved Maria Shriver. But there's some difficulty there, especially with Rahu and Ketu being in the 12-6 axis. We'll talk about that for a moment. But I do feel like his heart was there. His heart, when he talks about he really did love Maria Shriver, I do feel like he was very being very forthcoming, very real about that. Moon in the seventh house, that's what's going to make marriage important to Arnold. So I know there'll be people that probably still don't like the fact that he had an affair with somebody that was working in his staff. But Moon in the seventh house shows that he really does feel comfortable in a marriage relationship. He feels it's very important to him because Moon is in the seventh house. And Moon shows in our charts where we're the most comfortable, where we feel like our sense of rhythm. And I do believe, some of you might comment down below, but I do believe his marriage to Maria Shriver was quite enduring. So it really was actually quite an enduring relationship. And you'll notice seventh from Chandra or seventh from Moon is the first house. So this marriage really was meant to develop the self. And if you look at a lot of Arnold's movies, whether we're looking at Conan, or whether we're looking at like movies like True Lies, Terminator, I do believe he was married to Maria Shriver during those movies in the late 80s and 90s when he was basically at his pinnacle of fame. You might remember in the documentary, he talks about he was in a little bit of a face-off with Stallone. So they were kind of in an action hero face-off, but he really did achieve a lot of fame during that time. So I do feel like I felt like he was really putting his heart out there when he was discussing the affair and the effect that it had. And he felt really bad about it. It was one of these things that he considered, was one of the biggest mistakes of his life. I do feel like, he's being honest about that. Saturn in the second house can actually have a lot of issues with guilt in the lifetime. So there's a lot of issues with maybe feeling bad about things from the past or feeling guilt about things. So I do feel like he actually has a sense of moral compass. He's got Jupiter in the fifth house. The fifth house is one of the Dharma houses. So I actually feel like Arnold, for the most part, is a pretty good person. So even though, if you watch, what's that movie that I saw from back in the day? It was Pumping Iron. You see the young Arnold, and he's quite an entertaining character in that movie. Let's talk about Rahu and Ketu in Arnold's chart. Now, Rahu's in the 12th house, and Rahu is with Mars, which I find quite interesting. So, first of all, Mars is in the 12th house, and Rahu's in the 12th house with Mars. But Rahu in the 12th house could show a fascination with foreign lands. And lo and behold, I mean, what did Arnold end up doing? Arnold ended up moving to the United States. And so there's a fascination. That was part of his soul mission, really, going to foreign lands. And you'll notice that Saturn, his home country of Austria, well, it has that Saturn aspect. So you know what? Based on the chart, I don't know if he would have done well, even if he would have stayed in Austria. It might have been actually a very difficult path for him. So, Rahu and Mars were pushing him towards driving this instinct to go to another country, to a foreign country, especially America. The other thing I found quite interesting is when we think of Rahu with Mars, he's really developing this Martian energy. Okay, this energy of action. And you could think of Mars as the planet of bodybuilding, Mars as the planet of action. He literally was in action movies. But also, uh, the idea is with Rahu being with Mars is that it's this important manifesting energy. Okay, so if you remember from the documentary, Arnold talks about when he was a child, he had this vision of he had this a movie star that was, had a really they were really strong looking physique, really strong looking body, and he idolized this person. And in a lot of ways, Arnold was using law of attraction to manifest his future life. He was aware of it. The 12th house represents the astral realm. So if you read a book like Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda, what you learn is that there's different layers of reality. So, and this is a little bit of a lesson I kind of wanted to include because of what I really felt about Arnold's chart was essentially we have our physical reality, which would be like the first house. Saturn's really represented by the physical reality. Above that, we have the astral plane. And then above that, we have the etheric plane. And this is all in Autobiography of a Yogi, by the way. And above that, we have the causal plane. Okay, so there's these four planes of existence where things manifest. Okay, so when we're talking about 12th house, we're talking about essentially the astral plane. Okay, now before anything manifests in the physical reality, something to be aware of is it must first be in, manifest in the astral plane before it can manifest in our physical reality. So having Mars here and Rahu there, there's this powerful manifesting energy, being able to create your reality, because Mars is a very tamasic physical planet, just like Saturn is. So it's being able to dream your reality, get it from the astral realm, and manifest it into the physical. And that's what Arnold essentially was. So to me, when I saw Arnold's documentary and he talked about in his childhood being able, having all these dreams, sitting in his bed, having all these posters of all of his heroes, or his hero that he had, he was creating the life that he wanted to. And it was like supercharged with Rahu and Mars. He supercharged that and manifested that reality from the astral plane, which is quite impressive with Arnold. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the affair. So when we talk about cheating or misconduct, misconduct within marriage, the sixth house can be involved, the eighth house can be involved, and the 12th house can be involved when somebody cheats on their spouse. So when Ketu's in the sixth house, this can show a disregard for consequences. And it's not like in a malicious way necessarily. It could be like this person just doesn't fully, they don't fully really latch on to the consequences of what they're doing. Okay. 12th house shows like a very active fantasy life. So somebody that fantasizes a lot. 12th house rules behind the doors, behind closed doors relationships. So sometimes affairs can happen during a period of the 12th house, or at least relationships that are undisclosed to the public. But this Ketu in the sixth house shows this disregard for consequences. And so, this really was his weak spot. This Rahu and Ketu axis, even though it was able to manifest this level of fame with Rahu and Mars in the 12th house, bringing this fame in foreign lands, it brought in the other axis, which Ketu in the sixth house was this idea of divorce and separation. So that was definitely a karmic situation that took place with being married to Maria Shriver, and then this issue with the staff member even having a child. So that was quite an interesting story. Overall, I found that the Arnold documentary was very interesting. I actually had more of a profound respect for Arnold after the documentary. By the way, I did forget to bring up this whole idea of him being a governor of California. Jupiter in the fifth house is all about being a politician, royalty, spotlight. So, Jupiter in the fifth house really helped him become a celebrity and also a politician. So it worked very well for him. So thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. And I should be putting a new video here shortly. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.